Brave Canadians fought and died to defend and preserve our freedoms. Let us honor them, let us thank them, and lest we forget. I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is The Candice Malcolm Show. Hi everyone, thank you so much for tuning into a special Remembrance Day edition of The Candice Malcolm Show. Today I want to talk a little bit about some of the greatest moments in Canadian history, some of the proudest individual Canadians who fought, in many cases died, for our freedom. I know that in today's world, Canada is sort of known as like a kinder, gentler, more polite, more reserved version of our American neighbors. We are sort of known as being a little bit more progressive, a little bit more liberal, and sort of just more polite, more reserved for sure. But it wasn't always the case. Canada's reputation globally used to be quite different. We used to be known as sort of rowdy fighters, the kind of people that you would want on your side during a fight. Canadians were known and celebrated and revered as war heroes, as incredibly brave on the battlefield. They were feared by their enemies and, absolutely revered and loved around the world for the risks and the bravery that they would take. They're known as being innovative and having ingenuity, really sort of different than what comes to mind today when you think of a Canadian. And I think that the sort of new iteration of a Justin Trudeau Canadian is still quite wrong. You go to most parts of the country and that sort of rowdy, independent spirited, loyal, all of those great qualities, they still exist in many Canadians around the country. That might not be the reputation that we sort of get globally, but it still is there. And especially on a day like Remembrance Day, it's so important to revisit our history, to go back to those moments that really helped define us as a country and recognize the incredible bravery that was needed in order to go off to a foreign land, to fight, risk your life, in many cases just witness absolutely horrific things in the name of war, all to defend an ideal, the ideal of our freedoms, our Western liberal democracy that we have today, and how fortunate we are, how rare it is in human history to live in a country that is so free, so prosperous, based on the rule of law, that grants so many freedoms. I think that it's incredibly important for us to remember that and revisit it. So I want to first talk a little bit about Remembrance Day, the history of the day, and then I'm going to get into 4 war heroes that we selected to highlight on the program today. So Remembrance Day was first observed in 1919. It was observed throughout the British Commonwealth. It was originally called the Armistice Day because it was there to commemorate the Armistice Agreement, the agreement that ended the First World War. And that, of course, happened on November 11th. The agreement was signed at 11 a.m. This was in 1918. So the 11th hour, the 11th day, the 11th month. Oh, and by the way, you might be wondering why I'm still wearing my poppy, because you're supposed to take your poppy off after that 11 a.m. ceremony. Well, I record my show earlier in the morning and then we air it in the afternoon. So right now, as I'm recording it, it's not 11 a.m. yet, and hence why I still am wearing my poppy. But yes, so the 11th hour, 11th day, 11th month, that was the Armistice Day. So from 1921 to 1930, Armistice Day was held on Monday of the week of November 11th, so whenever that was Monday. But then in 1931, a member of Parliament from Comox, Alberni, introduced a bill to observe Armistice Day always on November 11th, passed in the House of Commons, and the day was changed to Remembrance Day. So the first Remembrance Day was observed on November 11th, 1931, and we have been observing Remembrance Day on November 11th ever since. So every year on November 11th, Canadians pause in a moment of silence to honor and remember the men and women who have served and who continue to serve Canada throughout times of war, times of conflict, as well as times of peace. We remember the more than 2.3 million Canadians who have served throughout our nation's history, and the more than 118,000 who made the ultimate sacrifice, who gave their lives to protect Canada, to defend our freedoms and our way of life. And of course, the poppy, we're all very familiar with the poppy. It is a symbol of Remembrance Day. Replica poppies are sold by the Royal Canadian Legion, and the proceeds go to veterans to provide assistance to veterans The national ceremony for Remembrance Day is held at the National War Memorial in Ottawa. The Governor General of Canada presides over the ceremony. It's also attended by the Prime Minister, other government officials, representatives of veterans organizations, diplomatic representatives, other dignitaries, veterans, as well as the general public. So in advance of the ceremony, we see long columns of veterans, Canadian Armed Forces members, RCMP officers, as well as cadets. They march to the memorial led by a bagpipe band and a color guard. And at the end of the ceremony, they march away to officially close the ceremony. And so Canada's not the only one to recognize Remembrance Day. Some of the 54 Commonwealth member states, including Canada, the United Kingdom, and Australia, they all observe the tradition of Remembrance Day, just like Canada, on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. Other nations observe a solemn day, but at a different time. So, for example, Anzac Day is observed in New Zealand on April 25th. In South Africa, Poppy Day is marked on the Sunday that falls closest to November 11th. So lots of countries around the world look at this day as an important day in history because it ended that First World War. And also many nations that are not members of the Commonwealth also observe Remembrance Day on November 11th, including France, Belgium, and Poland. And interestingly, the United States used to commemorate Armistice Day on November 11th. However, in 1954, they changed the name to Veterans Day. So just a little bit of history about this day, why we honor it, why we commemorate it, and really it just gives us an opportunity to pause and recognize how incredibly fortunate we are to live in this time of sustained peace, incredible opportunity, freedom, and prosperity. Yes, I know that so many of our freedoms have been taken away or at least suspended temporarily because of COVID and the crazy last 2 years that we've had. But really, when you look back and you think about some of the times where people actually went off to war, when the entire world was engulfed in a war, I mean, it's hard to imagine what it would feel like, to be a parent at that time, to have a child, to be in a situation where you were being sent off to a foreign land to defend a place that you've never even been to, people you've never met, as well as to defend Canada broadly and defend the world against threats. But really, we should all recognize how incredibly fortunate we are to live at this time. And it is because of the sacrifices by people who came before. So I do want to get into honoring some Canadian histories and spotlighting some really, really tremendous Canadians. But before I do that, I just want to say, if you are enjoying the Candice Malcolm Show, if you like what we do here at True North, head on over to tnc.news/donate and consider making a modest donation to help us with our efforts. Our entire operation is run off of donations, off of the generosity of our viewers, people who are watching. We don't get any money from the government. We don't believe that journalists should get money from politicians. It is a conflict of interest, and it is wrong. So if you support the idea of independent journalism, don't forget to head on over to tnc.news/donate and make a modest donation. If you're watching this video on YouTube right now, I'm just going to stop you, ask you to like this video, hit that little notification bell so you never miss an episode, and don't forget to subscribe to True North. If you're watching on Facebook, don't forget to like the True North page, like this video, share this video, and leave us a comment as well. And finally, if you are listening to the show in podcast form over on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you enjoy your podcast, don't forget to subscribe to the Candice Malcolm Show. And if you like the show, if you enjoy it, please consider leaving us a 5-star review. Go over and do it right now. It really helps us out. Okay, moving on. I want to talk about some of these Canadian war heroes because there's so many. As I just mentioned, there's over 2.3 million Canadians who have served in the uniform to defend Canada, and of those, almost 120,000 have given their life to defend our freedom. So first, I want to talk about a World War I war hero by the name of Leo Clarke. So Leo Clarke was born in Hamilton, Ontario on December 1st, 1882. He was enlisted in Winnipeg, Manitoba on February 25th, 1915. He served in the Canadian Infantry in the Eastern Ontario Regiment. So in 1916, Clarke was tasked with clearing out the left flank of a recently attacked German trench near the village of Pozières, France. So Clarke led his men to the trench, but when he got there, they encountered heavy resistance, and suddenly he found that he was the only survivor. He was the only one left alive. So armed with only a pistol, Clarke was facing around 20 German infantrymen and 2 officers. Undaunted, Clarke fought tooth and nail with whatever he could find, picking up enemy rifles off the ground, and finally using this pistol, he killed 18 enemy soldiers, captured 1, sent the rest running, and suffered only a bayonet bayonet wound in the process. And keep in mind, we're talking about the First World War, where guns didn't really work. I mean, half the time they were jam. The whole idea of modern warfare didn't exist. So really, a lot of the times these guys were fighting with their fists, with knives. And incredible bravery, incredible story of Leo Clarke from Hamilton, Ontario. So next I want to talk about a World War II veteran by the name of Thomas George Prince. Prince was one of 11 children born to Henry and Arabella Prince of the Broken Head Band in Scantonbury, Manitoba. Prince was enlisted in June 1940 at the age of 24 and began his wartime service as a sapper with the Royal Canadian Engineers. After 2 years with the RCE, he answered a call for paratrooper volunteers, and by late 1942, he was training with the 1st Canadian Special Service Battalion. As the name suggests, the group was one of the first modern special forces units performing highly dangerous missions behind enemy lines. They were arguably the closest real-world counterpart to Quentin Tarantino's Inglourious Basterds. Now, as one of Prince's officers recalled, he moved like a shadow. Sometimes instead of killing the Germans, he'd steal something from them. Other times, he'd slit their throats and not make a sound. So Prince served in both World War II, where he survived, as well as the Korean War. On February 8, 1944, in Italy, he managed to repair a 1,400-meter-long telephone wire while under heavy shelling by the enemy. He was alone and he had no help. He then engaged in 24 hours of solo spying that led to 4 enemy positions being destroyed. Now, sadly, despite surviving both World War II and the Korean War, when he got back to Canada, Prince's life sort of started to deteriorate. His life became increasingly difficult as his job prospects were slim, and he continued to struggle with alcoholism. Eventually, he became estranged from his own family. His own children went into foster care, and he continued to live in destitute. He lived at a Salvation Army hostel, and he died in Canada homeless. So very, very, very sad story for an incredible war hero. Okay, moving on, another World War II veteran. I want to talk a little bit about an individual named Ernest Smokey Smith. So he was born on May 3rd, 1914 in New Westminster, British Columbia. So he enlisted with the Seaforth Highlanders of Canada in March 1940 and began basic training with the Royal Canadian Regiment in Toronto. He went on to complete his training at Camp Borden before sailing out of Halifax to join the war effort in Europe. During the Second World War, Smokey became the only Canadian private to earn the Victoria Cross after he almost single-handedly fought off German tanks and soldiers during the Italian campaign. So in October 1944, as the Allies were pushing through northern Italy against fierce German resistance, Smokey and his small platoon were sent across the flooded Savio River to secure an important benchhead. After capturing the position, they came under an intense enemy counterattack. The Germans dispatched 3 Panther tanks, self-propelled artillery guns, and a horde of infantry to retake the position, pinning the Canadians down near the river. So Smokey didn't waste any time. He grabbed an anti-tank bazooka and sprang into action under intense enemy fire. He walked to about 30 feet of the first Panther tank and took it out with a single shot. So once the Germans overcame the surprise of Smokey's audacity, they sent 10 of their own infantrymen to go in and get rid of Smokey. Unfazed, Smokey grabbed his Tommy gun, stood his ground, killed 4 enemy soldiers, forcing the remainder to retreat. He continued to hold his position while defending a wounded comrade, forcing additional German forces to withdraw in disorder before carrying his friend to safety. So this is the kind of thing that Canadians were once known for, being just incredibly tough and standing their ground. Okay, now I want to finish off by talking about a Canadian war hero from my own generation. I want to talk about someone who fought in the Afghanistan War. I'm talking about Nicola Goddard, who was the first Canadian soldier to die in combat. So she was the first of 3 children for British and Canadian school teachers Tim and Sally Goddard. By the age of 18, she had lived in 7 different communities across Canada and attended high school in Antigonish, Nova Scotia. So after graduating from high school, Nicola flew off to Montreal for a basic officer's training course at the St. Jean Garrison. She then completed 4 years of Royal Military College in Kingston, Ontario. She graduated as a trained artillery officer and was posted to the 1st Regiment Royal Canadian Horse Artillery as a second lieutenant. She then deployed to Afghanistan in January 2006 as a forward observation officer attached to the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry. On May 17, 2006, Nicola, Goddard, and over 200 Canadian and Afghan soldiers were tasked to sweep an area south of Kandahar in the Panjwari district. The mission was to root out an element of the Taliban that was gathering in this area. So Nicola and her team were then ambushed by militants as they moved into a mosque in the district. Shrapnel struck Goddard in the back of the head, killing her instantly. She was 26 years old when she died. So again, incredible bravery throughout the generations, still incredible bravery today that we see by Canadian men and women serving in the armed forces. And we should always remember the contributions that they give, the sacrifices they make for us. November 11th is the perfect time to pause, take a moment of silence, and recognize how fortunate we are to be Canadian. I'm Candice Malcolm, and this is The Candice Malcolm Show.